Joel, a myth is a narrative told to convey a community's traditional wisdom. I was like, okay, sounds good. Myths are not generally told in the modern world because there are no longer bodies of generally accepted truths that can be conveyed in this way. What's the conclusion here? Myths are not generally told in the modern world. Why? Because we don't have these generally accepted truths. Even though that's a premise and you have to accept it as true, my gut reaction was like, what? Just because we're modern doesn't mean we don't have generally accepted truths, right? We might all believe that democracy is important, even if we've lost it. Like, there are certain things that we may accept. So anyways, I was a little skeptical of Joel's argument. And then the second person, of course there are myths in the modern world, which isn't surprising given our reaction to the first argument. For example, and by the way, what are examples? Examples are always, anyone know? They're always premises. And if you see the phrase, for example, it means that you just read a conclusion. You will never see, for example, in a vacuum, because it's going to point forward to a premise, but it's also going to point back to a conclusion. To give you an example, imagine if I just walked into this room and I hadn't said anything to any of you, and I said, for example, I've always thought about flying a plane. You'd be like, an example for what? Right? And so what that means is the phrase necessarily has to come after another claim, and that claim is going to be a conclusion. It may not be your main conclusion, but it is going to be a conclusion. So this person's, at least one of their conclusions is there are myths in the modern world. Why? What's the example? There is a myth of the machine. We see the human body as a machine to be fixed by mending defective parts. This may not be a narrative, but what medically trained specialists can deny the existence of that myth? Okay, apparently none can. So anyways, everything that came after the word example in this argument was just continuing to explain why they thought the first sentence was true. So the first sentence is the conclusion, and everything that comes after is evidence. Which one of the following most accurately characterizes the second person's response to the first? What did the second person do? Did they call into question the conclusion or the premises? How did they respond? Sure. What do you say?
B.
Wait, hold on.
Okay.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying, is that what you thought to yourself after you read the question? You said the answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, please don't misinterpret my... But this happens all the time. People are like, oh, well, it's B, or it's C, or whatever, right? But I'm saying right now, before you have any clue what the answer choices are, how would you describe it? What did this person do?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
She was trying to disprove the premise, because his premise is that a myth is a narrative told to convey community's traditional wisdom, and she's calling that out by saying, of course, never mind. I'm wrong.
I think she was arguing that there are myths in the modern world. He said that there aren't.
So the main conclusion of Joel is myths are not generally told in the modern world. And the second person is like, no, there are myths, right? So going directly after the conclusion and then giving us an example of a myth, right? Okay, so which one of the following characterizes the response? Well, let's take a look at these. Now, one thing to keep in mind, when you have a question like this and it asks you to describe what's happening, there are three types of questions that do that, and that's it. There's this one, which is a reasoning question. It's asking you, what's the reasoning? How did the person make their argument? There's a flaw question. Flaw questions ask you to describe what's going on, and role questions. Now, this is one of those three types. On the LSAT, inaccuracy is the greatest sin. So, I'm not religious, but I know that cardinal sin is like what? Like top, right? Bad, okay? Being inaccurate in any way is the cardinal sin on the LSAT. So, if you find an answer choice that's incomplete but accurate, that is going to be 100% correct over an answer choice that's complete, but in any way inaccurate. So what I mean by that is as we read these descriptions, as soon as we hit a word that is inconsistent with the passage, you can stop reading. Because inaccuracy is such a big deal. So answer choice A. It offers a scientific explanation. No, there was no scientific explanation. Right? They talked about science, but a scientific explanation would be like, let's rely on scientific reasoning or something. So this is out. B, it points out a weakness in Joel's position, sure, by advancing an analogous position. Is there an analogy here? No, this is an example. By the way, this is going to be tested in other contexts, but if you have a set of things, an example is within the set. Right? If I say, hey, this is a great class, for example, is Elliot right?
Mhm.
Elliot is a great student. I'm not saying it's a valid argument, but you're an example within the set, right? An analogy is always outside the set. Like the Yeti argument, that was an analogy. It said, oh, this is true here because of something that's totally different and true over there. So when I'm looking at B and it says it points out a weakness in Joel's argument position by advancing an analogous position, I'd be like, no, this is an example, so it's staying within the set of this, right? C, it is based on an unsupported distinction between traditional societies and the modern world. They don't make the second person doesn't make distinctions between traditional societies and the modern world, so that's out. D, it assumes that Joel is a medically trained specialist. No. It's just asking a rhetorical question. E, it offers a counterexample, yes, that calls into question part of Joel's definition of myth. Part of the definition. It's a perfect answer because it didn't call into question everything, but it did call into question some things, so that's the correct answer. Sound good? Okay, let's keep going. So,